Welcome to another deep dive. Today, we're tackling surveillance capitalism and its impact on society. Our guide is Shoshana Zuboff's book, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism. Oh, wait. And our mission is to help you understand its inner workings, potential consequences, and what, if anything, can be done about it.
It's a fascinating and timely topic,
Yeah.
especially given how deeply intertwined our lives are with the digital world.
Exactly. To set the stage, let's compare two different visions of technology. Back in 2000, the Aware Home Project. Imagine a future where technology was all about empowering individuals. You'd have complete control over the data generated by your digitally aware home. Fast forward to today, and we have devices like the Nest thermostat, which offer convenience but with a catch.
Nest's terms of service basically state that if you don't agree to data collection, they can't guarantee full functionality or security, so you're faced with a trade-off. Prioritize privacy and risk potential vulnerabilities, or surrender your data for peace of mind.
It makes you think about all the smart devices we invite into our homes, doesn't it? How do you feel about that trade-off in your own life? It seems like a far cry from the empowering vision of the aware home.
It is, and this trade-off is at the heart of what Zuboff calls surveillance capitalism. It's a new economic order that treats human experience as raw material to be extracted, analyzed, and sold for profit. It's not just about selling you a product. It's about using your data to predict and influence your behavior.
That sounds a little sinister. So how is this different from regular capitalism? Don't lots of companies collect data?
The key difference lies in the intention and scope of data collection. Regular capitalism might involve collecting data with your permission to improve a product. Surveillance capitalism, on the other hand, aims for total certainty, a complete understanding of human behavior, to manipulate and control it for profit.
Zuboff calls this instrumentarian power.
Mhm.
Right. It's like they're not just observing us, they're actively trying to steer us in certain directions.
Precisely. Think of it as a big other, a vast network of sensors and algorithms, constantly monitoring and analyzing our actions, nudging us toward specific choices, and ultimately shaping our behavior. This big other doesn't necessarily have a single face. It's a distributed system of power, embedded in the digital infrastructure we rely on every day.
But how did we get here? When did the internet go from a space of relative freedom to this landscape of pervasive surveillance?
It was a gradual evolution, starting with seemingly innocent intentions. Early internet companies like Google collected data to improve their products, like search engines. However, they soon discovered the immense commercial value of this data, that they could use it not just to enhance their products, but to predict and manipulate user behavior.
That's a pivotal shift, isn't it? What was the turning point where things really took off?
The launch of Google's Gmail in 2004 was a significant moment. Google's decision to scan private emails for targeted advertising sparked public outrage as people felt their privacy was being violated. This highlighted a growing disconnect between what users expected from the internet and how companies are actually using their data.
You'd think that outrage would have spurred some regulations or legal frameworks to protect user privacy, but that didn't really happen, did it?
Unfortunately, no. There was a lack of foresight and political will to address the implications of these emerging technologies. Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, which shielded internet companies from liability for user-generated content, inadvertently paved the way for the unfettered growth of surveillance capitalism, and proposed federal privacy legislation in the late 1990s failed to pass, leaving a void where these practices could take root and flourish.
So it's like a perfect storm, rapid technological advancement, lucrative commercial opportunities, and a regulatory vacuum. And then there's a Trojan horse of free services,
Yeah.
those seemingly indispensable tools we use every day.
Exactly. We've become so accustomed to free search engines, social media platforms, and email services that we often overlook the hidden cost, our data. Those lengthy, convoluted terms of service, the uncontracts, as Zuboff calls them, are essentially giving these companies a blank check to extract and exploit our information.
It's like we're signing away our digital rights
Yeah.
without even realizing it. Legal scholar Margaret Radin describes these contracts as sadistic and private eminent domain because they're basically a unilateral seizure of our rights without real consent.
It reminds me of,
Yeah.
well, this might sound strange, but it reminds me of the Spanish conquistadors.
That's an interesting comparison. What do you mean?
When the conquistadors arrived in the New World, they'd read a document called the Requerimiento to the indigenous populations, demanding their surrender to the Spanish crown. The problem was, it was read in Spanish, a language the indigenous people didn't understand. This charade was meant to provide a legal and moral justification for the violence and exploitation that followed. I see your point. Both the uncontracts and the requiremento involve a deceptive agreement that strips individuals of their rights and power, often without their knowledge or understanding.
It's a stark reminder of how power imbalances can be exploited, even in the digital age.
And as surveillance capitalism has evolved, the scope of data extraction has expanded dramatically. It's no longer just about what we do online. It's about collecting more intimate and personal data, our location, our health information, our biometric data, and even our emotions.
You know what always gets me? Fitness trackers. They seem so harmless, even beneficial. You're tracking your steps, your heart rate,
Yeah.
all in the name of health. But are we overlooking the potential costs to our privacy?
It's a valid concern. Numerous studies have shown that seemingly innocuous apps, including fitness trackers, often collect and share sensitive data with third parties without our knowledge or consent. And it's not just fitness trackers. It's happening with all sorts of apps, from weather apps to games to social media.
It feels almost impossible to escape. But here's what really freaks me out. The rise of the emotion economy.
Yes. The commodification of our inner world. Companies like Realize and Affectiva are using facial recognition and AI to analyze and monetize human emotions. They claim it's for improving advertising and making products more engaging. But the implications are unsettling, to say the least.
Imagine a world where every expression, every flicker of emotion is being tracked and analyzed. It's like our inner lives are becoming just another data point to be exploited.
Is it?
And it's not just about knowing our emotions, is it? It's about shaping them, influencing our behavior in ways we might not even be aware of.
That's a key insight. Surveillance capitalists are actively developing tools to modify our behavior, drawing inspiration from B.F. Skinner's work on behaviorism. Skinner believed that human behavior could be controlled through a system of rewards and punishments, and that's exactly what we're seeing play out in the digital realm.
Give me some real-world examples. How are they actually doing this? It all seems so subtle.
Think about the like button on Facebook. It's a form of positive reinforcement that encourages us to share more, to seek validation through online interactions, or consider the endless scroll features on social media, designed to keep us hooked and trigger those dopamine hits that keep us coming back for more.
It's like they've hacked our brains to keep us engaged. No wonder it's so hard to put our phones down.
These platforms are also masters of tuning, tailoring content and recommendations to our individual preferences and vulnerabilities. Then there's herding, using social pressure and conformity to nudge us towards certain behaviors. And let's not forget gamification, turning everything into a game with points, badges, and rewards, a very effective way to modify behavior.
And this is all happening under the guise of personalization and convenience.
Exactly. We're trading our privacy and autonomy for the illusion of a more personalized, streamlined digital experience.
And perhaps the most vulnerable among us are young people. Their brains are still developing, and they're particularly susceptible to the manipulative tactics of social media. It's no coincidence that rates of anxiety, depression, and self-harm have skyrocketed alongside the rise of social media.
You're absolutely right. Social media platforms are particularly adept at exploiting the anxieties and insecurities of adolescents. It's a perfect storm of vulnerability and algorithmic manipulation. And speaking of manipulation on a grand scale, consider China's social credit system a chilling example of instrumentarian power taken to its extreme.
It sounds straight out of a dystopian sci-fi film. How does that system work? And could something similar ever happen here?
China's social credit system? It uses a vast network of surveillance and data analysis to assign citizens a score based on their behavior, everything from their financial transactions to their social media activity, and even their interactions with others. High scores grant access to benefits and opportunities, while low scores can result in punishments and restrictions, limiting access to travel, education, or even social services.
It sounds like an incredibly effective, albeit terrifying, way to control the population. Do you think there's any chance something like that could take root in Western societies? I mean, we value individual freedom and privacy.
It's true that Western democracies have a different cultural and political landscape than China. However, we're already seeing troubling trends emerge. The increasing use of predictive policing algorithms, the proliferation of facial recognition technology, and the growing power of tech companies to shape our online experiences. These are all signs that the underlying logic of surveillance capitalism is seeping into our institutions and practices.
Is there any hope? Are we just doomed to be pawns in this game of surveillance capitalism? Or can we reclaim our privacy and autonomy in the digital age?
Zuboff is cautiously optimistic. She emphasizes that surveillance capitalism is not inevitable. It was invented by specific individuals
Right.
at a specific time and place, driven by a particular ideology and economic logic. If it's a human invention, it can be uninvented, or at least significantly reformed.
Yeah. That's a hopeful thought. I like the idea that we have agency, that we can push back against these trends. But how do we do that? What are the concrete steps we can take to reclaim our digital lives?
Awareness is the crucial first step. We need to understand how these systems work, how our data is being collected, analyzed, and used, and how these practices impact our lives, both individually and collectively. Once we understand the game, so to speak, we can start changing the rules.
Okay. So knowledge is power.
Mhm.
But what comes after awareness? How do we translate that knowledge into action?
We need to demand stronger regulations and legal frameworks that protect our privacy and autonomy in the digital age. The EU's General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR, is a good example of this. It gives individuals more control over their personal data, requiring companies to be more transparent about how they collect and use data, and giving individuals the right to access
Okay.
and even delete their data.
I've heard of GDPR, but I have to admit, I don't fully understand what it entails. Can you give a quick rundown of its key features and how it's trying to curb the excesses of surveillance capitalism?
Certainly. The GDPR has several key provisions that aim to shift the balance of power in favor of individuals. First, it requires companies to obtain explicit consent from users before collecting their data. No more burying consent in those lengthy, indecipherable uncontracts. Second, it gives individuals the right to access the data that companies hold about them and to know how that data is being used. This transparency is essential for holding companies accountable. Third, individuals have the right to correct inaccurate data and to have their data deleted under certain circumstances, like when the data is no longer necessary for the purpose it was collected for. These are just a few of the ways the GDPR is trying to put individuals back in control of their data.
It sounds like a step in the right direction. Are there similar efforts happening in other parts of the world?
Yes, the GDPR has inspired similar legislation in other regions, though it's important to note that the implementation and enforcement of these laws vary widely.
So it's not just about enacting laws, but also about making sure they have teeth, that they're actually enforced. What else can we do beyond pushing for government regulation?
We can support the development and adoption of privacy-focused technologies and tools. There are browsers, search engines, and messaging apps that prioritize privacy and data security by design. These alternatives often have a different business model than the data-hungry giants, relying on subscriptions or other revenue streams that don't depend on exploiting user data.
That makes sense. If we want to change the system, we need to support companies that align with our values. Are there any other strategies for resistance that you find particularly promising or inspiring?
There's a growing movement of individuals and organizations demanding greater control over their data and pushing back against the excesses of surveillance capitalism. These efforts range from grassroots activism to academic research to legal challenges. It's a David versus Goliath battle. But remember, David won in the end.
It's encouraging to hear about these pockets of resistance, these signs that people aren't just passively accepting the status quo. What are some examples of these efforts that our listeners might be interested in learning more about?
One notable example is the Electronic Frontier Foundation, or EFF, a nonprofit organization that defends digital privacy and free speech rights. They've been instrumental in challenging government surveillance programs and advocating for stronger privacy protections online. Another group worth mentioning is the Center for Humane Technology, which focuses on the ethical implications of technology and advocates for designs that prioritize well-being over addiction and manipulation. They're doing some really interesting work on how to make technology more humane.
It's inspiring to see these organizations fighting for a better digital future. It reminds us that we're not powerless in the face of these seemingly overwhelming forces. What do you think is the most important takeaway for our listeners from this deep dive into surveillance capitalism?
I think the most important message is that we have a choice. We can choose to be aware, to be informed, and to take action. We can choose to support companies and organizations that align with our values. We can demand better from our elected officials and hold tech companies accountable for their practices. The future of our digital world, and indeed, the future of our humanity, depends on the choices we make today.
That's a powerful message. It can feel overwhelming to confront these issues, but it's also empowering to realize that we're not just passive consumers. We have a voice.
Yeah.
And we can make a difference. What's one thing our listeners can do today to start taking back control of their digital lives?
One simple yet powerful step is to start paying attention to the data you're sharing and the permissions you're granting to apps and websites. Take a few minutes to review your privacy settings on your social media accounts and your phone. Consider using a privacy-focused browser or search engine. These small changes can make a big difference in limiting the amount of data you're feeding into the surveillance capitalism machine.
Those are great practical tips. It's all about taking small steps, making conscious choices that align with our values. And remember, you don't have to do it alone. There are organizations and resources out there to support you on this journey. It's empowering to remember that we're not powerless in this digital landscape. We can make choices that shape the future of technology and protect our individual rights. It all comes back to awareness and action.
Precisely. And it's not just about protecting ourselves, it's about safeguarding the very essence of what it means to be human. As Zuboff so eloquently puts it, if surveillance capitalism thrives at the expense of human nature, what does that mean for the future of our humanity? What choices will WE make?
Wow. That's a profound question. It makes you pause and think about the bigger picture, doesn't it? It's not just about data points and algorithms. It's about who we are, who we want to be. In a world where our every thought, feeling, and action is potentially up for grabs.
This deep dive has only scratched the surface of a complex and evolving topic. But hopefully, it's given you a clearer understanding of how surveillance capitalism operates, its potential consequences, and the crucial fact that we have a choice. We can choose to be aware, to resist, and to demand a future where technology empowers us, not exploits us.
It's been an eye-opening conversation. I have to admit, it's a little unnerving to realize how deeply these systems have permeated our lives. But it's also inspiring to hear about the individuals and organizations fighting for a better digital future, reminding us that we're not alone in this struggle.
Absolutely. And for our listeners who are feeling overwhelmed or unsure where to begin, remember that even small steps can make a difference. Start by becoming more mindful of your digital footprint. Think about the data you're sharing, the permissions you're granting, and the choices you're making online.
Every click, every like, every purchase leaves a trace. By becoming more conscious of those traces, we can start to reclaim our digital agency.
Exactly. It's about making informed choices that align with our values, support companies that prioritize privacy and data security, engage in conversations about these issues with your friends and family, and don't be afraid to speak up and demand better from our elected officials and the tech industry.
So it all comes down to awareness and a belief that we can shape a better future for ourselves and for generations to come. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we encourage you to continue exploring these vital questions. Until next time.